Hey everyone, this is the second part of my 3D character creation series. If you haven't seen the first part, you can check that out along with the rest of the series in the playlist in the description. This video covers the blocking out and sculpting of a high poly mesh based on our model sheet, so be sure to have it ready. I'm using Blender for this, specifically version 4.4.3, but if you use another 3D software package, the same general steps should still apply. First, import it by dragging your images into the viewport. Unfortunately, you have to do this one at a time. If you drag in multiple images, it'll only import the last image you selected in the file browser. Next, you need to align your images to the center. To do this, first change the default cube's height to that of your character, make sure its origin is at the bottom or else you'll get some wonky scaling. You can also make the cube thinner if you want to. Then, using the size and offset sliders in the Image Properties tab, that's this little red picture icon in the sidebar, reposition and scale the image accordingly. I usually count the height as being from the bottom of the feet to the top of the head, ignoring any extra bits, like her ears in this case. If you have multiple images, press the left Alt key to affect all of them when changing a value. Next, duplicate the images and position them for the other axis. Like I use the front to resize, so I duplicate them and reposition them for the side view. Now we can start blocking out our sculpt. First, subdivide a cube. I'm using 3 subdivisions here. This gives me a nice performance to detail ratio. Next, position the verts around the cube so the mesh kind of matches the part of the body you're trying to block out. Like I always start with the upper torso. If your character is female, ignore the breasts for now. We'll get back to those later. Make sure you're using the mirror modifier or turn on X-axis symmetry. If you can't make the shape quite right with just the cube, add a loop cut, but limit the amount you add, especially if the character's on the stylized side. The less you have, the easier it is to readjust the shape if you need to. For a blockout, I make sure to have each major joint get its own mesh. Like the upper arm and the lower arm each get their own mesh. The torso gets 2 of them because there's a major bend area dividing it right down the middle. Also, be sure to name your meshes. For the sculpt and blockout, add a MSH- prefix to each mesh object you add. Like for example, I'm working on the torso here, so I named the part MSH-torso. This will help you stay organized later. The last thing you want is to be 40+ hours into a project and not be able to find something because you have 30 objects all named cube. It's okay if it's not 100% accurate to the model sheet, or like 95% is fine. We're going to be tweaking things later anyway, so don't waste time on something that'll just get overwritten down the line. For example, I recently revamped Cassie's design, and by that I mean I redrew her with better proportions and fluffed up her tail a bit more. And this model sheet is still from that old design, but because the change is so minor, I can afford not redrawing the sheet, instead putting in some guesswork when I model the tail. Once you get to the arms and legs, it's a good idea to put on a mirror modifier to save yourself some time. A trick I always do, especially for dual mesh mirrors like this one, is to spawn an empty at the world origin, name it something like _MIR, and set the mirror object to that. Make sure in the name you add an underscore as the prefix so it appears at the top of the selection box dropdown. Then continue shaping the parts. For the arms, this is where the top view we drew comes in handy. If your character is female, now's a good time to add in the breasts. Add a UV sphere, then, using an empty as the mirror object, place that as the mirror modifier. Then position and scale them based on the reference. Then in edit mode, grab the vert at the top, press O for proportional editing, and then move the vert up with G+Z. Use your scroll wheel to change the fall off of the proportional editing. Then, back in object mode, rotate them until they line up with the reference. Now, even if we have a character who is always fully clothed, it's a good idea to model them as 2 spheres rather than a capsule. The reason we do that is when we retopo, it'll allow us to get the edge flow we need for proper deformations. It's like this for male characters as well, albeit not nearly as exaggerated. Now comes the bane of every artist, the hands. Don't worry, they're just as hard to make in 3D as they are in 2D. This is where referencing and base message really come in clutch. And is also a perfect example of them not being a good one-to-one replacement for a full sculpt. Like, I set up the hand mesh to be in line with the forearm, but oh no, it's too short. So I get the positioning right and then model the fingers from scratch. I use a few tutorials and references for these, and while I can't for the life of me remember all of them, I'll put the ones I do remember in the description. Some things to keep in mind when modeling the fingers are there should be an inner crease where the joints bend inward, and there should be a bump where the knuckles are on normal fingers. We'll get to those more later when we retopologize. The neck is nothing major, it's just a cylinder with some loop cuts to help fan it out more near the shoulders. For the head, I'm actually using 2 cubes here, one for the scalp and the main bulk of the head, and another for the cheeks and jaw. Now the ears are kind of tricky. First, mirror a plane as you normally would, don't have the empty selected, make sure it's mirroring only itself, and then add another mirror modifier with the empty selected as the mirror object. Then, and this is important, in object mode, position the plane where the ear is going to be, then shape the ear as you would any other part of the body. For the tail, I added an hourglass-shaped cylinder at the top of the butt for a hair tie, and then molded a cube into a wispy-looking shape for the bulk of the tail. Once you're happy with your blockout, apply all the modifiers and then join them together. As you join them, Alt-Tab into sculpt mode and remesh with Ctrl-R. Use R to change the remesh size if it's too big or too small. This is a good way to help smooth things out before you remesh further. Importantly, don't join sharp objects. Like, don't join the neck to the head, because that's a sharp angle we're going to want to exaggerate later. Save the hands for last. Since Cassie is so stylized and her fur is thickish, there's not going to be a lot of physical anatomical detail even if she's wearing like a tank top. So I kept the detailing to a minimum at this part. Once you have everything else done, join the hands to the torso mesh, and instead of trial and error remeshing, just add a remesh modifier and shrink the value until the fingers stop merging with each other. Then apply the modifier. While past me is finishing up the blockout, if you want to help fund future projects, join the channel membership. You get to see my videos a day early and get access to an exclusive channel in my Discord. I also have super thanks and stuff for sale on my Ko-fi, like Penny's rig from the Ghost of Paldea video if you only want to support me once. Of course, if you can't do any of that, you can support me by liking, subscribing, commenting, and sharing this around so more people can see it. Anyway, once you have all your stuff remeshed, you can really start adding detail. Remeshing likes to make things look really sectioned out, so smooth things out with shift. For a stylized character like this, the actual sculpting is mainly adding creases for joints like the arms and knees, filling things out and smoothing out the obviously overlapping spots. Sometimes you might need to turn on Dyn Topo to fill things out, such as the gap between the thumb and the palm was a bit too long, so I'm bulking it out here. If you want to add more anatomical detail, one of the best brushes for adding form is the clay strips brush that I forgot existed for most of this process. At this point, I tend to turn off the model sheet visibility altogether and just adjust things to my liking, fixing inaccuracies and making the model smoother to work with during the retopo stage, which will be our next step in the process. The full series playlist is in the description like I said earlier, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye bye!